My name is Haley, and I'm 27 years old. I'm a professional archivist, which means I'm paid to be quiet and organized. My grandfather Arthur's funeral was a blur of black suits and polite, insincere murmurs. But the reading of his will, held in a stuffy, wood-paneled law office on Beacon Hill, was a nightmare. My father, Brian, his face a mask of smug grief, received the family's $50 million investment portfolio. My mother, Susan, was bequeathed the $40 million Beacon Hill brownstone. My brother, Kyle, and my cousin, Megan, both received trust funds in the millions. Then, the lawyer paused and looked directly at me. To my granddaughter, Haley, he read, I leave the antique wooden box in my study. May she value what is inside. The room didn't erupt in loud, angry laughter. It was so much worse. It was the quiet, condescending chuckle of old money snobbery. The sound of people who are so secure in their superiority that they don't even need to raise their voices. My brother, Kyle, leaned back in his chair, smirking. A box, he said, just loud enough for the room to hear. How quaint. About your speed, Haley. My mother, Susan, ever the picture of tragic grace, patted my knee with a hand cold from the rings she wore. Don't look so sad, dear, she whispered. I'm sure it's a lovely keepsake. A trifle, as your grandfather would say. A trifle, a worthless, sentimental object. My father, Brian, just shook his head, his face a mask of disappointment. He'd already turned back to the lawyer, discussing capital gains on his $50 million portfolio. I had ceased to exist. I looked at their faces. My cousin Megan was already texting, probably about the new gallery she could open. Kyle was whispering to her, and they both giggled. The old me would have shrunk. The old me would have felt tears welling up. That hot, awful sting of shame. The old me would have wanted to disappear. But I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I just stood up. The legs of the antique chair scraped quietly on the polished floor. If you'll excuse me. I walked to the front of the room, took the small, dark wooden box from the lawyer's desk, held it under my arm, and left. I didn't slam the door. I closed it softly behind me. Driving back to my tiny apartment in Jamaica Plain, the box sitting on the passenger seat, I finally understood it wasn't just about money. It was never about the money. I realized I wasn't just the quiet one or the bookworm in the family. I was a structural component. I was the family scapegoat. You see, in families obsessed with a perfect public image, like mine, someone has to be the designated failure. Someone has to be the lesser one so everyone else can feel superior about their own lives. My very existence as a quiet, underpaid archivist was a service I provided them. My brother Kyle, who bounced between consulting gigs funded by our father, could look at my 9-to-5 job and feel like a dynamic entrepreneur. My cousin Megan, who called herself a gallerist but had never sold a painting, could look at my simple life and feel like a sophisticated patron of the arts. And my father, Brian, a man obsessed with the idea of the Hale family legacy, was terrified of his own failures. He needed me to be the simple one so he could feel like a titan. My mother, Susan, needed me to be a sweet, lost girl so she could play the role of the concerned, martyr-like matriarch. Their mockery in that office wasn't just casual cruelty. It was necessary. It was the act of them projecting all their own insecurities, all their own emptiness, onto me, so they could walk out of that room feeling rich and powerful. I'd spent my whole life being the balance sheet for their egos. I was the emotional offset that made their insecure lives feel solvent. I parked my car, still holding the box. The anger I felt wasn't hot. It was cold. It was clinical. This wasn't a family dispute. It was an accounting F. And I was finally ready to see the real numbers. Back in my apartment, I set the small wooden box on my kitchen table. It was old, dark, cherry wood. polished smooth by time. It wasn't locked. I opened the lid. There was no thick envelope. No stacks of cash. Just a small, velvet lining. On top, there was no letter. Just a single, old-fashioned, heavy brass key. The kind you see for a bank vault. I almost missed the next part. Tucked under the velvet flap was a first-class plane ticket. One way, to Zurich. Dated for next week. Taped to the back of the ticket was a single, handwritten word from my grandfather Zurich. That Sunday, my mother insisted on a family dinner at the Beacon Hill house. A celebration of Grandpa's legacy. It was really a celebration of their new tax brackets. The entire time, my father, Brian, and my brother, Kyle, argued over whether to sell Grandpa's art collection as a single lot or individually through their auction house. I waited until dessert. As my mother was explaining her plans for a $40,000 kitchen remodel, I cleared my throat. I'll be out of town for a bit. I said quietly, I'm using the ticket Grandpa left me. I'm going to Zurich. The silence was instant. Kyle actually barked a laugh. Zurich, what are you going to do there? Haley opened a cuckoo clock shop. My cousin Megan chimed in. Oh, how quaint. I hear the chocolate is lovely. My mother sighed. That dramatic, long-suffering sound she'd perfected. Haley. Sweetie, she said, her voice dripping with pity. Don't chase a silly idea. Your grandfather was old. He probably forgot what he put in that box. Why don't you focus on something real? Then my father spoke. His voice wasn't mocking. It was cold. It was angry. This is frivolous. Haley, he said, putting his fork down. Absolutely frivolous. Wasting time and money on a whim. When you should be thinking about supporting the real family legacy. The real legacy. He meant Hale and Sons rare books. The auction house my grandfather had started, and that my father now ran. It was his obsession. The source of all our family's intellectual pride and social standing in Boston. It was his entire identity. Your brother and I, he continued, are trying to secure the company's future. We're managing tens of millions in assets. And you're... What, chasing a ghost in Switzerland? You're a Hale. It's time you contributed. Call the airline. Get a refund for that ticket. And come to the office on Monday. I'm sure Kyle can find some filing for you to do. I looked at their faces. Kyle was smirking, enjoying the show. My mother was nodding in agreement. They weren't just dismissing a trip. They were enraged that the simple one, the family scapegoat, was suddenly acting outside of her prescribed role. I was supposed to be the quiet, grateful, slightly pathetic archivist. I wasn't supposed to have plans. I wasn't supposed to have secrets. I felt that cold, clinical clarity again. This wasn't a discussion. It was a command. Designed to put me right back in my little box. I folded my napkin and placed it on the table. The ticket is non-refundable. I said, my voice perfectly even. My flight leaves Tuesday. I stood up. Thank you for dinner. Mother. Father. I walked out of that house. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care what they thought. I was going to Zurich. I was going to find out what that key was for. The Zurich Bank wasn't what I expected. It wasn't some charming old stone building with ivy. It was a fortress of silent, smoked glass, and expensive, soundless carpet that seemed to absorb my very existence. I was led to a private room by a man in a perfect suit who introduced himself as Herr Ziegler. They didn't treat me like a tourist. They treated me like an owner. He took the heavy brass key from my hand. If you will follow me, Miss Hale. He led me down to the vaults. A massive, circular stale door hissed open, and we walked into a room that smelled like dry air and old stable money. He used my key, along with his own, to open a large stainless steel deposit box. Inside, there were no gold bars, no jewels, just a simple, thick, leather-bound ledger, and a letter, sealed, with my grandfather Arthur's wax signet. Herr Ziegler gestured to a private viewing room. all glass and quiet light. We will leave you. Please take all the time you need. I sat down, my hands trembling just slightly. I opened the ledger first. It was a bank statement. A private trust. The Arthur Hale Legacy Trust. Beneficiary Haley Hale. I looked at the balance. My vision blurred. I had to count the zeros. Once, twice, 3 times. $550 million. My heart wasn't pounding. It just stopped. I stared at the number, trying to make it make sense. This had to be an elaborate, cruel mistake. Then, I opened the letter. It was my grandfather's handwriting. The sharp, intelligent, precise script I had known my entire life. My dearest Haley. It began, if you are reading this, then the first part of my plan has worked. I am gone. And your family has, I am key to certain, shown you exactly who they are. I did not leave you a trifle. My girl, I left you a test. I have spent the last 20 years watching your father and his branch of the family become obsessed with the performance of intelligence, the status of legacy, but without any of the hard work, character, or true intellect that built it. They are hollow. And they would have destroyed you. I was not just an intellectual, Haley. I was a ruthless global investor. And you are my heir. The $550 million in this vault is your activation capital. Your full trust, which my team of advisors has been managing for you since you turned 18, is currently valued at approximately $2.5 billion. I stopped breathing. $2.5 billion? I read the words. But they had no meaning. I read them again. I read on. My hands shaking so badly, I could barely hold the thick paper. You are wondering. He wrote, why I put you through that humiliation in the lawyer's office. Why I let them laugh at you as I lay in my coffin. It's the question that must be answered. You must understand this. Haley, giving you this money would not have fixed your problem. It would have only made you a target. They would have swarmed you, manipulated you, pretended to love you, and they would have bled you dry. And you, with your kind heart, you would have let them. You would have tried to fix them. So I had to give you something more valuable than money. I had to give you the truth. I had to give you a shield. By forcing them to reveal their true, ugly, condescending nature before you knew you had power. I was vaccinating you against their inevitable poison. That will, reading wasn't my last act of cruelty. Haley, it was my last, and most important, act of protection. They think you are simple. They think you are the scapegoat. Good. Let them. You and I, we are archivists. We know how to read the text. We know that the real story is always in the margins. In the ledgers. In the secrets no one else is smart enough to look for. Your father inherited a company. You inherited an empire. Now, go and do what you were trained to do. Be methodical, be analytical, and protect our true legacy. Your team is waiting. Arthur. I sat in that silent, airless vault for an hour. The shock faded and was replaced by that cold, clinical clarity. I wasn't a simple archivist. I wasn't the family failure. I was the weapon my grandfather had been sharpening for 27 years. I picked up the ledger and walked out of the vault. When I met Herr Ziegler, the trembling was gone. My hand was perfectly steady. Miss Hale, he said, his face neutral. How may we be of service? I looked at him, and my voice was new. It was clear and cold. I need my full team. On a video call. In 1 hour. I want a complete forensic analysis of every asset and liability in my father's company. Hale and Sons Rare Books. I want it by Monday. He didn't blink. It will be done. I wasn't a tourist in Zurich. I was a CEO. And I had work to do. I didn't go home. I stayed in Zurich for 2 weeks. I didn't see a single mountain or buy a single piece of chocolate. I didn't go as a tourist. I went as a CEO. My grandfather's team, my team of analysts, lawyers, and wealth managers worked around the clock. briefing me in that same glass-walled conference room. For 14 days, I learned about my empire. But I only had one real question. Hale and Sons rare books. Run a full forensic analysis. I'd ordered. I want to know every dollar. Every debt. Every acquisition. Assume it's an enemy takeover. Go. The report came back on the final day. It was catastrophic. The legacy my father was so obsessed with, the one he'd accused me of not supporting, was a house of cards. It was a dying brand. Leveraged to the absolute hilt. My father, Brian, in his desperation to be seen as a Boston intellectual titan, had been making a string of ego-driven, disastrously expensive acquisitions. He was paying absurd prices for any manuscript that would get his name in the art journals. He was drowning in debt. The company was cash poor and on the verge of collapse. But that wasn't the report's conclusion. That was just the introduction. Herr Ziegler, my main Swiss manager, pointed to the last 3 marquee acquisitions. The ones that had made my father's reputation in the last 5 years, a lost Shakespearean folio, a first edition Galileo. These are fakes. Miss Hale, he said, his voice flat. All 3. Brilliant fakes. But fakes nonetheless. We had our experts in London and Rome confirm it. He paid over $60 million for worthless paper. The room went very quiet. This wasn't mismanagement. This wasn't ego. This was fraud. He hadn't just mismanaged the legacy, he had built a fraudulent one on top of it. And he was about to be exposed. It gets worse, Herr Ziegler said, turning the page. The company is in default. It's been surviving on a single, massive, $70 million bridge loan from an anonymous lender. Taken out 2 years ago. The terms are ironclad. Payment is due in 30 days. The lender has the right to call the loan in full. I looked at him. An anonymous lender. Yes. He said. He slid one final document across the table. It was the loan origination form. The lender was a shell corporation based in Geneva. That corporation, he said, is owned by the Arthur Hale Legacy Trust. I stared at the paper. My grandfather, he had known my father was a fraud and a failure. So, he provided the loan to keep the company afloat. Probably biding his time. And now, I was the anonymous lender. My father hadn't just defaulted on a loan to a stranger. He had defaulted on a loan to me. I closed the report. The anger was gone. This wasn't personal anymore. This wasn't a family drama of a slighted daughter. This was a business transaction. An asset, leveraged by fraud, was in default to its primary creditor. I looked at Herr Ziegler. My father's about to be exposed for fraud, I said, and I hold the note on his entire life's work. That is correct. Miss Hale, book my flight back to Boston, I said, and I need you to make a call. I want to buy a house. I flew back to Boston with the cold clarity of an accountant looking at a fraudulent ledger. I didn't call them. My phone buzzed with angry, confused texts from my father, Brian, and my brother, Kyle. I ignored them all. My first act wasn't to go to my apartment, it was to buy a house. I had my team secure the $30 million historic stone manor in Brookline. The sprawling, ivy-covered estate my mother, Susan, had coveted her entire life. The one she'd always called a house for a real Hale. It was a cash purchase, closed in 48 hours. My second act was to call the loan, my lawyers, representing the anonymous Swiss creditors, sent the formal notice. Hale and Sons was in default. The $70 million note was due. In full. Immediately. Of course. My father couldn't pay. He panicked. He threatened. He pleaded. Finally, my lawyers graciously summoned him and the family to an emergency meeting with the new creditors to discuss a possible liquidation. They told him the address of my new house. I was waiting in the grand foyer when they arrived. I watched their car pull up the long, circular driveway. They got out, looking stressed, arrogant, and confused. They were walking into the house my mother had dreamed of. And their faces were a mask of pure envy. Then they saw me, standing by the grand staircase. My father, Brian, actually stopped and scoffed. The arrogance was so reflexive, he couldn't help himself. "Haley," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "What is this? Did you get a job serving the drinks?" I smiled. It was a cold, calm, clinical expression. "No, Dad," I said. My voice echoed slightly in the marble entryway. "I'm the new owner of this house." My mother's hand went to her throat. "What? What did you say?" And as of 9 a.m. this morning, I continued. "I'm the new owner of Hale and Sons. You defaulted on my loan. This isn't a negotiation. Dad, this is a foreclosure." The color drained from his face. My brother, Kyle, just stared, his mouth open. My mother was the first to find her voice. It was a shriek. You can't do this. We're your family." They screamed. They begged. They threatened to sue. My father cycled from rage to pathetic pleading, telling me I was destroying his life's work, the very work he had built on fraud. And as I watched these people, my family, disintegrate in front of me, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I just felt free. I finally understood. For my entire life, I'd been waiting for their approval. But family is not an unconditional contract that forces you to endure abuse. It is not a blank check for their humiliation. I realized that true belonging doesn't come from a bloodline that treats you like a trifle. It comes from your own self-worth. And sometimes, to save yourself, to save the very legacy they claimed to protect, you have to be the one strong enough to cut the toxic branch you came from. They weren't my family. They were just my first and final bad investment. My father was ruined. His face, which had been a mask of intellectual arrogance my entire life, was now just a hollow, empty thing. My mother was sobbing. My brother, Kyle, for the first time, was completely silent. My terms were simple. This wasn't a family discussion. It was a creditor's settlement. I would not press criminal charges for the fraud. That would be messy, public, and bad for the brand. But they were out. Completely. Publicly, they would announce their retirement, effective immediately, to pursue philanthropic interests. My lawyers already had the press release drafted. They had no choice. They signed. The next day, I walked into the historic Hale and Sons building. I walked past my father's opulent, mahogany-paneled office, the one he was so proud of, the one built on fake manuscripts and bad loans. I didn't even look inside. Instead, I took the elevator straight down to the basement, to the archives. The air was cool and smelled of old paper and history. I ran my hand along the vellum spine of a 16th century manuscript. This was the real legacy. Not the status, not the parties, not the Beacon Hill brownstone. It was the knowledge, the stories, the history. My grandfather didn't leave me money just to be rich. He left me work to do. He had saved his real legacy by giving it to the only person in the family who had ever truly valued it. He gave it to the archivist. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe. And remember, the people who underestimate you are just giving you the motivation to build your own empire. Never let anyone else define your worth.